All right, welcome everyone to today's NACDA programming. Today we're going to take a look inside the general manager role. My name is Kristi Dosh. I'm the founder of Business of College Sports and also a sports business contributor for Forbes. I teach NIL classes in 3 different departments at the University of Florida. And so I'm really excited to have this session today because my students are always asking, what is this new general manager role? What do they do? And I think it looks a lot different from one position to the next. So I asked some speakers to join me today and talk about what their roles look like, how they got into those roles, how they see them shaping and changing as we move into the future. So I want to introduce our other 3 panelists, and then I'm going to kind of kick off by sort of asking them what they were doing before this role, because as many I'm sure are aware, this is sort of a newer role in college athletics. And now I feel like every single day I see news announcements and tweets and messages about new GMs being hired. So it's definitely a growing position in college athletics. And I'm excited to dig into it a little more and see what it looks like today. So I am joined by Rachel Baker, who is the general manager of the Duke men's basketball program. I believe Rachel was actually one of the very first GMs who was hired. So as much as you can be an OG in this space, I think Rachel fits that mold. I also have Patrick Stacy with us, the assistant general manager for NC State men's basketball. Patrick was formerly at Wyoming, so he's also going to be able to share with us a little bit about how that role might differ from one school to the next. And then we also have Sam Fisher. He's the assistant general manager for Stanford football. So we've got football, we've got basketball. We're going to talk about, what these roles look like and how they're changing. I thought I'd start off by asking each of you, what were you doing before you got this GM role? So Rachel, I'll start with you. You've been in this role, I think, the longest. What were you doing prior to becoming a GM at Duke?
It's actually working in finance, which is crazy. I only lasted about 10 months. I wasn't great at it, but I was working in finance. Before that, I worked at Nike basketball for a very long time, always in a sports marketing capacity, really helping athletes from the grassroots level, all the way up to our signature athletes navigate, the business side of the opportunity that they had. So really making the most out of their opportunity, working with the brand, launching products, to make the most out of really what they were able to. So that's where I met Coach Shire in my role over at Nike. And when he got the head coaching job, this was kind of his brainchild of trying to, as college sports became even more of a business from an athlete perspective, looking for someone with my background to help with not only on the university side, but also with our athletes as they were getting new opportunities.
How long have you been at Duke now?
I just finished my 3rd season. I started in 2022. Mm-hmm.
You are the OG GM. Okay, we'll put a pin in that and come back because I want to talk a little bit more about what your position looks like. Patrick, tell us a little. I know I sort of already spoiled it and said you were at Wyoming previously. What were you doing before being a GM at Wyoming?
So interestingly, I also started in finance. I graduated from Loyola Chicago in 2018, and I was just working as an analytics manager on that team. We went to the Final Four, and it kind of captivated my love for basketball. But I started in finance as well, and I was, just doing a normal desk job at a company called CDW, just sitting in Excel sheets all day, and was still doing my basketball stuff on the side, and was building connections, still working with the basketball team, and eventually started a basketball analytics company called Jam Basketball Intelligence. At the peak, I had about 20 clients working with me, and I was providing them with, pregame scouts based on player tendencies, really digging into the analytics side. And as NIL and the transfer portal has emerged in the last few years, really digging into like player values and identifying undervalued players and how they fit within a team, and a lot of roster construction stuff. But definitely leaning a lot on my finance background, and kind of being able to navigate the new ecosystem that way has been extremely beneficial.
Cool. Yeah, I can see how that sort of work translated into this GM role. So we'll come back and talk more about that in a minute. Sam, what about you? What were you doing prior to joining the staff at Stanford?
For sure. So I joined when I was about 10 years out of undergrad, where I'd mostly been doing tech and startups, a mix of big tech and working at startups, which was fun because a good mix of stuff occasionally in sports, but kind kind of like Patrick, when I wasn't working in sports, was just doing sports on the side to stay close and stay around it and kind of monitor all the things that were changing. So little things like doing PA announcing for some of the smaller sports, helping out with the stat crew on game days, just kind of um, being around. And then the last kind of year and a half, I was working on a few startup ideas, and I was also executive coaching some like non-traditional founders and CEOs. And ironically, out of all the things I've done to prep, that was probably the most helpful because I think there's so much about working with Andrew in this role where like being able to talk through problems together and kind of work together to figure that out is probably the most interesting thing I can bring.
I'll stay with you for a minute, Sam, and ask you this. What does the team look like there? I think we all know Andrew Luck is the GM there at Stanford. That's been pretty widely publicized. What does the team look out like outside of the two of you?
We're the only two like new hires as we kind of build out this front office. So we're kind of still in the process of figuring out. I think we're like the first college football program that's really trying to reorient our org to flow through a GM instead of flowing through like head coach as a CEO. We're the first ones that are kind of putting someone else in the CEO role. So we have this guy, Preston Pearson. It was kind of, I'd say, what a lot of people would have called the GM. I think he's even had the GM title before, kind of a classic director of player personnel, kind of head of recruiting. So he definitely plugs in with me and Andrew on that. Um, and then more from the operations side, we have a longtime DFO, Matt Doyle, who I guess many of you who've been around the industry would know, DFO, player development, all that stuff. He also helps. I'd say I think the four of us are really the front office. Everything else, we're kind of still in the process of figuring out what exactly we want in terms of building things out. But really just for like roster management stuff, really just Preston, Andrew, and myself.
And you all are focused primarily on football. Are there other folks at Stanford focused on any of the other sports in a similar sort of GM role?
We don't have that yet. I think each of the basketball programs, men and women, have kind of designated someone on their staff to be the point person on this. Men's basketball is like Eric Reveno, one of the assistant coaches, who's also a Stanford MBA alum, in addition to his kind of Stanford background, and he's a bit of a legend. So I think he and Kyle have kind of taken the lead. Kyle, in a lot of ways, I think would tell you that he's kind of somewhere between a head coach and a GM. He kind of is a little bit more of that high level. And we'll kind of work together on a process, I think, or we'll kind of jam. Like I've shown him my tracking tools and kind of how I visualize things and shared that with them. And for women's hoops, I think they're in a similar spot. So we've been talking about it, and um, I just think I'd be curious to hear. Like I'm excited to hear from Rachel and Patrick, 'cause I think the role is so different. Like my understanding, I think in your world, there's the analytics side. There's also like the agent connections. There's the actual kind of marketing. I mean, there's something. I mean, like a 12, 13, 14 player roster versus like a 100 player roster. Like a lot of our challenges are like observability, like just in sheer number of negotiations and all that, as opposed to like, yeah. So I think it's probably a really different job. I can't imagine that the job is similar at all, which is why I think people will be slow to have like a one GM fits all model, but could be wrong.
I have so many follow-up questions for that. So we'll come back to some of them. I wanted to have Patrick and Rachel both, while we're on this subject, chime in on what your roles look like. I'll sort of go in the reverse order we were doing earlier. So Patrick, can you talk a little bit about what your role looks like compared to, what you just heard from Sam, both in your current role at NC State, but I'm also really curious to hear how that might have been the same or different at Wyoming.
Yeah, so at NC State, and it's similar to Wyoming, it's very analytics heavy and kind of identifying undervalued players during the transfer portal, period, that we can recruit and fit with Coach Wade here. At Wyoming, it was the same thing, but it was even accentuated more because we didn't have the resources financially in terms of some of these guys with the amount of money that's getting thrown around these days. Our budget was a lot less significant than what we have here at NC State, but it's really about finding areas within the margins to gain positive expected value. So if there's some key statistical metrics that we have internally that we value, whether that's with Coach Wade or Coach Wicks, identifying those things and players that kind of fit the criteria of what we're looking for to kind of gain an edge that way. And it's really about just navigating it efficiently. There's so many names in the portal every year now. So when there's 2,000 names, you can watch film and be familiar with a certain amount of players, and the coaches will dig in and do that work, but also being able to narrow it down and kind of have, hey, this is a list of all our guys that meet these key areas that, have translated to success for this coaching staff or this play style, and really kind of honing in on the target, and then, shooting, with more of, you're not shooting in the dark. You're shooting at a target that, is clear and concise and defined.
What does the team look like there? Is there another person, another couple of people? Is it just you? What does that look like?
Yeah, here at NC State, we have Andrew Slater. He came from the Oklahoma City Thunder, very highly regarded and connected. And I think it's a good blend with us because he is, extremely connected. And that's where, as Sam mentioned, the agent relationships and all that can come into play because at the end of the day, you can have a list of all the guys you want, but if you don't have the ability to get them, it doesn't really do you any good. So here, that's, we kind of play off each other in that respect. At Wyoming, it was, we were more lean, and it was just me, and I was mainly doing analytics, work there with Coach Wicks, but a lot more, involvement in practice too, and tracking stats in practice, and kind of building out a framework of how we wanted to operate, just collectively as a unit. So a lot more lean at Wyoming in the mid-major level, and then here obviously we have people with a lot of skill sets that complement each other very well, and we can kind of leverage those to build the most efficient team we can.
Are there GM roles in any of the other sports at NC State?
Yes, our football team has a GM. I'm not familiar with any other GMs, but our football team has a GM, and they're building out their own analytics stuff as we speak with a major data company around here. So they're very excited about that as well.
I want to talk about software and tools. So we're definitely going to come back to that because I think everybody is using some different stuff and cobbling things together at this stage. So I think people will be really interested to hear about that as well. Rachel, what about you? Tell us a little bit about, you've been there 3 years now. What did it look like when you got there versus what it looks like now?
Um, it's changed a ton over time. I think the biggest thing is what I thought it was going to be and what I thought either Duke would or wouldn't do, or what this market was going to look like has completely changed. So what started as um, I was strictly focused on commercial opportunities in the beginning. So really trying to look at ways in which we could connect our athletes, their social media opportunities with businesses, our creative team and that profile with different commercial opportunities, and start to grow the revenue for both the athletes and the program. That quickly pivoted to our collective, and I never thought it was a thing that we would do. I didn't think it was the direction we were headed in, but then it's what the market required in order to continue to compete at a really high level. So navigating that in a way that felt right to Duke and our athletes and Coach Shire, and then as we enter this rev share era, and both from a negotiation perspective, but also just how to make it sustainable over time. Working with Sam, I like what you said. I feel a lot of it is problem solving, being really nimble and flexible, and talking through based on my experiences at the corporate level, my time at the NBA, some other places, just how to have the right outcome for the university and the athletes, and make sure that we're keeping everyone's best interests in mind. So of course, what comes with that is agent relationships, family relationships. I always tell everyone this is John Shire's roster, and it's my job to figure out how to get the pieces that he wants, and then make sure that it's cohesive. So really working closely with our coaching staff, our analytics team. And I just try and heavy focus on relationships and intel, and also intangibles, and how that can come together to create a winning roster.
And what does it look like at Duke in terms of GMs for other sports? Is there one for football or women's basketball or anything else?
Not by title, but there's someone for our women's program that's focused on a lot of the similar things that I'm focused on. Our football team both has a chief strategy officer that's, I would consider, my counterpart, and then has a recruiting GM that's solely focused on recruiting and identifying players. We also have someone working with all of our Olympic sports and kind of driving the NIL strategy at a high level for our athletic director. And then we all work together to see how it best complements our individual programs.
You mentioned something, Rachel, that I wanted to touch on next, which is how you work with collectives. As much as you guys are willing to share, what does that relationship look like? And I would imagine what it looked like last season is maybe a little different than what it's going to look like this coming season, assuming that the House settlement is going to get approved, or that revenue sharing is coming in some other format. Can you speak a little to what that relationship looks like and how that's evolved?
Yeah, in the beginning, everything had to be kept extremely separate. And I think we saw some instances where having individuals outside of the program, whether it was negotiating or recruiting or whatever it may be with athletes, wasn't what was best for the university or the athletes or the collective for that matter. So then now the NCAA has become more flexible with how we can really interact with the collective, the different people that work there. Our case is a little bit different. Our idea was to keep it very lean, and just knowing that all of this was going to change so often. So going too deep on the for-profit side or mass fundraising or anything like that may not be sustainable as this continued to change. Depending upon what happens with rev share, it may change again. It might go away. As with every single person on this call, we're kind of waiting around to see what the market dictates there. But we have a great group of really invested, they like to call it donors, investors, whatever you want to call them, that are solely focused on the success of the program.
For those who are, maybe at a different level, maybe it's somebody on here who's D2 or D3 level, or, just someone who this isn't part of their everyday. Can you tell a little bit, like, big picture, what it looks like during the recruiting process in terms of the role that you play versus the role the collective plays, and like how those conversations are all brought together?
And again, it is really hard to say because the way we do it, I'm sure, is far different than anywhere else. And I think that it is, a coach sets out kind of like the vision for the program and those like pillars of it that they want to align with. And then it's my responsibility then to the collective's responsibility just to be an extension of that. And I think that we don't, as it stands today, our collective doesn't have a ton of individual interaction with our student athletes and agents. We like to just protect them, honestly, between a lot of the back and forth and knowing that we have those relationships. But we've seen it other way. In the beginning, you had to do it completely the opposite. And so we're just kind of continuing to navigate that as it changes.
Patrick, what about you? What does it look like at NC State? Is it any different than what you hear Rachel describing?
No, it's pretty similar to what she described. I would say at Wyoming though, it's more so the collective wasn't too involved at all with in terms of the recruiting process. It's really, more traditional, the coaching staff, and you're recruiting a different type of player for sure at a place like that. But yeah, the collective involvement there in terms of the recruiting process was pretty removed. The biggest thing there was getting the player to believe in the fit and the level and how you could, help them achieve their goals and win there. And then, everything else kind of fell in line behind that. But you're definitely recruiting different types of players as opposed to someone in the ACC or a high major level.
Yeah. Sam, what about you? Does it look any different on the football side?
Football, I think going back to like the roster size part, it's kind of wild. I think for the transfer portal period, it's truly mayhem with the number of people you're dealing with. So I would say for that, there's just a lot of risk in the more complexity you have to what the collective does, the more risk there's going to be that there's a mistake in communication or someone doesn't answer a phone and all that stuff. Because I think, so that's kind of something I will say during the high school recruiting period, you have a lot more time to develop stuff. They come to campus. So I think in past years, the collective would like have a presence on campus during the high school recruiting periods. And then maybe like one other thing I would say is there was a lot of variation in the legitimacy of offers from collectives, especially early on in this process. And we had some really great donors kind of leading the charge in the collective and also backstopping the collective. And so like I think we're really proud as a university, as a collective, as a department, like everybody always got what they were offered when they were supposed to get it in this. And there was definitely a window where that was like a recruiting edge. And I think especially when you had enough time for the people to get to know it during high school recruiting and they talk to 40 guys in your team, 50 guys in your team, and everyone be like, oh no, I always got whatever. Like, oh, that actually had some credibility. I don't think that we're in a state of the world right now where that's as real, but I think especially in that like Matt Sluka UNLV era, there was like a value add in having a collective where like there was some very wealthy people who had always backed, like there was something there, and I think we're really appreciative of that. I think moving forward, I think we're all hopeful that the people who are like kind of running the roster and running the team can have these more direct conversations, and I think that all makes sense for everybody.
You brought up something I wanted to go to next, Sam, which is the sort of the difference between that high school recruiting and the transfer portal. What does your job look like when it comes to the transfer portal? Because I would imagine everything's faster and crazier with transfers. What does that look like for you?
I think every portal will be different. The first portal, Andrew and I came in on December 1, like right the day after the season ended. And truly like it was we, it was really right around then that we had decided to come, and nobody knew or kind of really had the ability to plan more than a couple days ahead of that time. So that first portal, I saw my job as process, like the process enforcer of like we had a relatively clear idea of our budget, we had a relatively clear idea of our needs. And what I tried to do is just like be super good on like observability and process, very quickly spinning up, some like views of where we're at, where we've chosen to invest, and where we're kind of making progress towards those. And whenever we were going to deviate from that plan, being the person who kind of like asked hard questions, saying, okay, if you want to go higher for this person, we can do that, but like where are we taking it from? Like where in this plan, because there is not an endless supply of money. Like let's make these trade-offs. And I think we did it like we had a plan to like go after some wide receivers. It turns out that market exploded. So it was like, all right, is this a need that we have to have, or if we're not getting good value, will we kind of take some of this away? And so I think that was probably my primary job during that portal period. I think that will always be a role, but I think now that I have more time for like the spring and then I look forward to the fall, maybe being a little bit more proactive in terms of having, a wish list ahead of time, being able to evaluate the prospects a little bit more through analytics and data. I think one thing we're really cognizant of is we'd love to offload as much as we can from the coaching staff during the season when it comes to transfer portal scouting. We'd love them to focus on coaching. So as I'm projecting to next year, I'm thinking like, how might we be prepared for the transfer portal period that starts like right at the end of the season, assuming it still happens that way, while not relying on our coaches? So that's like the type of thing that whether it be some combination of data, maybe it's contingent, scouting, hiring, whatever it ends up being. I would love, like, to me, that's an ideal end state to work towards.
Rachel, you've been around a little longer now, so you've seen the transfer portal come into being and how the changes that have occurred over the last few years. What does your job look like in terms of the transfer portal? You obviously have fewer players to deal with, but does it look any different than what Sam's going through?
I'll just start by saying, Sam, I tell my counterpart on the football team all the time, I don't envy your job. I couldn't do it. I can barely handle the 15. So good luck and Godspeed. But I think it's changed a bit. The portal was definitely alive and well when I started. How we engaged with it has changed over time. We had minimal portal activity this year, a ton of portal activity last year, somewhere in between the year before. The difficult thing with the portal now going on, the run that we went on this past year, is the timing of when it opens. So it opens and I'm actually spending much more time vetting with different agents, players, working with our analytics company, so our coaches can be primarily focused on winning games. But what that did, and our team kind of made a commitment that they would all be super present and focused on the goal at hand, winning a national championship. And that meant that our coaching staff had to do the same. So Coach Shire didn't take a single call, not a single Zoom. Like, he wanted to make sure he was all in on what we were trying to accomplish. So I actually spent more time in that window. And then the very next step is recruiting your existing team and making sure who's going to stay and that they feel good about their opportunity here at Duke. And then it's a matter of plugging athletes back in from the portal to fit the remaining holes. But again, it's tricky. Like your current team's under attack the whole time. You're trying to go about things in during a really gray area will also stay really competitive. So, and then an issue on the basketball side that's a little bit different for football is then also the NBA deadlines that fit in there. So a lot of some of the kids that we were recruiting were deciding between school and the draft, which just makes it, you have plan A, plan B, plan C, and eventually you get to today and hopefully your roster's almost done. So it really is similar to kind of what Sam was saying, focusing primarily on the process of it. Once the coaches identify who we want to go after and where those gaps are, how we get them there. So what's the story we're telling about Duke being the best place for them to be, working with their families and their representation to make sure they understand that. And then, of course, financially, making sure that we're navigating our budget to land who we need to land and keep who we want to keep.
How transparent do you find current athletes are about whether they're looking around and planning to enter the portal or planning to declare for the draft?
The draft is unbelievably transparent. I mean, our team, I would say, was very transparent. The thing I think that they got caught in is they're getting calls that entire month of March and April. And none of our guys entered their portal, and every single one of them has heard from other schools. And we certainly try and respect that process. And it's hard because, especially now that there's financial incentive to transfer, their kids, their family, it's human nature to be tempted by other opportunities. So I think that I just go back to relationships and feeling that there's a level of trust there where they can share what else is happening, and we try and be unbelievably transparent as well to encourage some of that honesty. And then really fortunately this year we were able to keep all of our guys, and we feel really good about, in this era, the importance of that kind of consistency.
What about you, Patrick? What does it look like at NC State or Montana in terms of managing? I'm sorry, not Montana, Wyoming. I keep wanting to say Montana. I really want you to. We talked about this before we went live with you guys. I really want Patrick to have been at Montana, apparently, because it's what pops out of my mouth every time I say it. Wyoming and at NC State, what does it look like in terms of managing the transfer portal?
Maybe a little different at Wyoming because, there's certain players that you could get there if they have a good season in a league like the Mountain West, which is, historically over the last 3 years been a solid league, top 6, 7 league in the country. They're going to have suitors from, some of the biggest programs in the country trying to pick them off. So it's going to be tough to compete from that standpoint with trying to retain those guys. But it's also about using common sense. Like if you have a player that's averaging 18 points a game and being very efficient, it's going to be very tough to keep him when, the cream of the crop can come looking for him, and, they can sell him a lot of nice shiny toys, in respect to what we've had in Wyoming. But it's really about using common sense and then understanding their value. So when I was working with my analytics company, I would be having conversations with all the staffs that I worked with, and it was kind of taboo, how much a player was making, but getting an understanding of the range of kind of what players were making for certain production. And I was able to build a regression model that, can predict or give an estimate of a player's range or value within the market. And, the market has exploded this year. It's gone up about 190% across the board. I think it'll come down eventually, but just being able to understand and adjust our models to have, go to a player, go to a family, go to an agent, say, this is what we have him worth based on what he produced. And it makes the conversation a lot more concise and transparent from our end and their end, and it makes the decision-making process a lot easier as well.
That was actually where I wanted to go next. And for those of you who are watching, I'm looking at the questions you're sending in, and I'll get these sort of worked in to all the things I plan to talk about. You've asked a lot of really great questions, and one of them happens to be where I wanted to go next. And Patrick, you touched on it, so we'll start with you. What kind of software are you using, and how are you? Tell us a little bit about what it does in terms of roster management or valuation, that sort of thing.
So me personally, with my analytics company, I've built out a lot of things that I have, internally and that we use, but like a player rating system. It's all just internal proprietary metrics, but I lean a lot on Synergy too, to watch film. Synergy as a great resource and breaks things out situationally if players are really good in ball screens or transition or catch and shoot better off the bounce, off the dribble, or off the catch. And, just being able to kind of sift through key things that we look for stylistically on there is very helpful. As far as like coding software, the most complex I go is RStudio. I think it's good for someone in an analytics space to get a little coding background. It makes it a lot easier to sift through data. But then from being in finance, I just got really, really sharp in Excel, and I feel like I'm a wizard in Excel, can do anything in there. But really just being able to kind of work through a lot of data and manage it efficiently, organize it, make it easy for people, not only yourself to work through, but if you can create dashboards for coaches to look through and kind of play with, I think that kind of optimizes the whole process for everybody. But in terms of software, it's just things that I built within my company. And then for basketball, synergy is great. And, just basic stats that you can get anywhere else if you're looking at it from an analytical lens. And it's just kind of understanding with data, what produces success for your specific team or coaching staff.
We'll stick with basketball for a minute. Rachel, do you guys use anything different or handle that side of things any differently?
I'm just so glad Patrick said Excel, because if I came on here and led with that, I was going to feel really silly. But I do a lot of my work in Excel. But then also from a basketball perspective, synergy is a big one. We work with a analytics company called BLA on some predictive metrics around roster construction that just kind of give us an idea. But then so much of it, especially when, and again, talking to football, and I'm sure Sam, you have a perspective on this. A lot of it is feel. So when you're in the way that coach is trying to put his roster together, at the end of the day, the numbers may say something, but then when you get to know, and it makes it harder in the portal, because when you're recruiting from a high school perspective, you get to spend a lot more time seeing someone and their personality and building trust and things like that. But a lot of it sometimes does come down to feel for what we're looking for.
I will tell, if any of my students are watching, I did send this link out to them. Please learn Excel, because when I hire interns, I use Excel for a lot of the stuff that I do, like the data and the things that I keep track of as a reporter. And I find that very few college students have ever used Excel before, at least the ones that come to me. So learn Excel, students. If you think you want to go into this field, Rachel and Patrick have now told you why Excel's got to be on your list.
They probably call it Google Sheets, but that works just as well too. I'll let you
Same
guys.
difference,
Yeah, that helps too.
Sam, what about on the football side? Is there different software you're using over there?
There are a lot of people trying to get in this space, and I think I'm evaluating all of them. From the observability roster construction side, I still haven't found anything that's better than if you're good at Excel or Google Sheets. I think it's just the customizability, and it's not that crazy. So I think on that side of actually visualizing where you're at and planning and all that, I do think if you're good at it, Google Sheets, Excel it's easy, it's cheap, and it's customizable. I think on the like advanced metrics, if you're trying to value people, there are a bunch of people trying. I'm evaluating them all the time, and it's fascinating. I also I work at the school, and I'm an alum of the school that is like the best in the world at this stuff. And so one thing I'm spinning up is like leveraging students and faculty and classes and coursework, because I think like if we're going to be good, if Stanford's going to be good in this era, like some part of it has to be us leaning into that side of things. It also will help us get better buy-in and ownership from the university. Like we want the school to feel involved with what we're doing, and we want to leverage the things the school does well. So couple things, like there's a computer science senior project class on campus where they have to do like group projects that are often sponsored by industry, and I've gotten a few projects sponsored so people are getting like course credit as seniors working on stuff for us, which is really cool. And then I had a meeting yesterday or Monday with the new head of Stanford. As a new data science group. They've kind of pulled out of computer science. They're a new building. The chair who I met with a couple days ago won a Nobel Prize. And so you meet with like some really interesting people. So I was in his office for 20, 30 minutes, kind of talking about the state of data science for college football and kind of working on ways we could work together. So I'm trying to get really creative on that side of things, and yeah, then kind of plug into what we're doing. But that's been really fun. I really enjoy those conversations, and we've got some amazing people here that I'm trying to bring in the fold. They want to help, just trying to build process and find a way to make that repeatable, make that like a nice engine.
So next time we do this webinar, we all get together, we're going to have it sponsored by Excel. Because we're all on board with Excel. I wanted to emphasize something you said, Sam. So I teach NIL classes at University of Florida in the public relations program, in the undergrad and graduate sports management program, and then I'm teaching at the law school this fall. And one thing I say to schools over and over is you have so many students on campus who are interested in this space. Use them. Like most of my students are not athletes. Most of them, they maybe were high school athletes or they have a sibling who's an athlete. Some of my grad students are former athletes. And I do get a handful of our UF athletes in my classes, but it's a lot of non-athletes, but they're super interested in NIL and revenue sharing, and they want to be involved. And there's really great models at other schools, like at Oklahoma State. The brand squad out of their business school there is doing incredible work on the marketing side. So I just want to emphasize what you said about kind of tapping into the rest of campus, because I do think there are phenomenal ways to integrate this with the learning that's going on campus and the careers that the non-athletes on campus want to have in this space. Okay, so that's about my soapbox on that. Kind of going off of that conversation, I want to talk a little bit about, well, you know what, actually, I'm going to ask you one question because it came in the Q&A. Somebody specifically asked if any of you are using Teamworks GM, their GM software.
I'm not.
Okay, then we won't talk about it anymore. Okay. I want to talk about valuation because as a reporter, some of what I hear from coaches and from agents is that, especially when we're talking transfer portal, but I would imagine it happens with high school recruits too, is that athletes or agents are bluffing numbers and saying they've got an offer from somewhere else that's much larger than it really is. Can you talk to how you navigate that? I'm trying to go in a different order every time. I'll start with Patrick this time. Is that something you've had to navigate, and how do you sort of sniff that out and figure out like what you all are willing for the valuation to be?
Right. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of fluff there, in my opinion, in terms of, the agents and players. Obviously, you're trying to get as much money as you can, and it's basic economics. It turns into a bidding war sometimes, but that's where having, tools that, coach or we as a group believe in, that, when we say a player is worth this amount in our system or the range that they're within, that we kind of try to stick to those numbers. And, if it gets too high above that, you kind of have to be okay with letting the player walk away. And obviously it's all, like Rachel said, a lot of it also is feel too, so there's maybe a time where you go over if you think it really completes your roster, but we like to have data to back everything. And, for us, we try to take a lot of those conversations and bidding wars out of it with the data. And some agents and people are very receptive to it, and sometimes you can get people that come in and they want a substantial less amount of money that we haven't valued for, then maybe that's a player you try to jump on to gain positive expected value. But a lot of it is feel, and obviously being able to negotiate, and the relationships play a very, very large part in that. But for us, just sticking to kind of our principles and believing in the system and the math that we have behind it is a big part of our valuation process.
Rachel, what about it, Duke?
Yeah, echoing so much of what Patrick said. Unfortunately, in this space, the market sets their values. So a lot of times, especially with some of the athletes that we're competing against, we may feel strongly about something, but at the end of the day, if they have something on the table and that's kind of like you said, that the market has just boomed this offseason in a way that we frankly didn't expect at all. And we do believe that the best recruitment strategy is retention. And it goes back to some of what you were saying, Patrick. Some of those conversations are around where you're developing trust and there's some understanding about really what you're trying to accomplish. So much of what we've had to explain about the market and some of our offers is like trying to put together a complete roster. So yes, one number might be double what we offer, but it's 50% of the total budget versus 10% of ours or whatever it may be. And I think when we've still tried to stay pretty steadfast, and what we're trying to do is accomplish win a national championship, and that requires putting together a really good team. So for anyone on here that can impact it, a salary cap would be fantastic. It would make it so much easier for all of us. But right now it's really open market, which makes things a lot more challenging. But it just goes back to some of the relationships, and really it's still recruiting. It's painting the picture, selling a dream, and then the money is a piece of that. But we try and have that conversation last, so that there's an understanding that they're all in on the plan, and then the money's just a massive benefit alongside of that.
And just in case there's anybody listening in that wants the legal point of view, I just spent last week at the Allegheny Bar Foundation up in Pittsburgh, and talking about the House case and revenue sharing, and talking about a salary cap and the antitrust issues that come with that. So for those who, I won't go into a whole legal discourse on this, but you can't collectively bargain with athletes unless they're employees, and you can't have a salary cap unless you collectively bargain. Even the cap being set in the House case is problematic. And I know it seems weird that a judge is going to approve approve something that's against the law, but that actually happens all the time because it's not her job to judge whether it complies with antitrust law, because that wasn't the question before her. Her job is to ensure that the settlement adequately compensates the class members and accounts for what they had in their complaint. She actually is not ruling on whether this cap would pass antitrust muster or not. So even the cap in that case is problematic. That's my legal brief for the day. Sam, what does it look like for football? You obviously have a lot more players you're having to deal with. How do you handle that sort of like bluffing and that part of the negotiation?
So one, I think going back to what Patrick said about having as best as you can possibly do, given how much the market changes year by year, if you can have some type of system that comes up with what you think someone might pay this person with a certain budget and as for a certain role. It's really helpful for anchoring how real this sounds. So we're not always competing against people for this with the same budget. I think there was one example we were competing with an SEC school. I think it was like Arkansas or whatever. And we have a reasonable good idea what Arkansas is spending as a whole. And then we use our kind of scouts like, where does this guy fit on Arkansas? Is he a starter at Arkansas? It's like, no, he's probably like a good depth guy at Arkansas. So what would Arkansas pay a good depth guy at this position if their total salary cap is X? And I think that helps you feel, is that in the ballpark of what this person is saying, right? And then I think at the end of the day, you kind of have to, you've got what you think they're worth to you, what you think other schools might be offering, what they might be worth to the market, or at least the market they're in, and you're trying to find value kind of in there. And I think you have to be comfortable losing if someone adds more value to one of your opponents. You know, I mean, if someone else in the market is getting more value out of the kid, then you might not get them, and that has to be okay. I think and I think also that there's so much decision fatigue in this world that I think just having a baseline response, because we do so many of these, of like, we feel good about our offer. Like just something like that. Like, hey, is there more room there? We feel really good about this offer. You just, and that at least, maybe you've got different versions of it when you're kind of negotiating for this one kind of anchor piece. But if you're thinking too much about this all the time, you're gonna burn out super hard. And then one other thing I want to add is I think everything you said, Rachel, about when to have the money conversation is exactly the way we do it for high school recruiting. In the portal, I think we've started flipping it because we find that otherwise so much is happening so fast in the portal that we felt like maybe it's easy to waste some time going down the rabbit hole where you find out someone's just making a money grab. And if someone's making a money grab, like, good for them, but you kind of need to find that out early on in the process. So high school recruiting, we want to get to know the kids, sell the school, sell the role, all that stuff, and then talk about money at the end when they have the context. For the transfer portal, like, I think we're more willing to just like, hey, this is the ballpark we're thinking, and just find out whether it's worth even starting to have the conversation. Because I think we feel the pain of wasting time in the portal so much more than the pain of wasting time other times of year, because it's just so precious. So that's maybe the one area where it feels really different.
We've got a question from the audience I think is a good one, and I'll throw this up for anybody because I don't know who may have dealt with this more than others, but they want to know how the recruitment process and the valuation and the deal sourcing, all that is different for international players. And I can hit the legal side if you need me to, but has anyone really had to deal with that or make any decisions around that? I mean, for those who don't, international student athletes can't get paid to work. They can't do anything active. They don't get to do the same types of NIL deals that other athletes do. They can do passive opportunities, like they can be part of group licensing and they can make money off of their jersey or a trading card, but they can't promote it themselves on their social media while they're in the United States. So their NIL opportunities have been limited. And for those going to convention, I'll plug this. I'm doing a panel at convention that is going to have an immigration attorney on it who has handled a lot of cases. And she has a big case, a big litigation case right now for an LSU women's basketball player. And she's going to talk about how she thinks this looks going into revenue sharing, because she's very concerned about international student athletes once revenue sharing comes into play. So we can get into all that on the panel for those of you who are going to be in Orlando and can come hear that panel. But does anyone here have experience with international athletes and anything to kind of add to that conversation and how that looks different for you?
We had a few at Wyoming on the roster, and I was just going to echo what you said. You just have to be, it's a little more limited in terms of what you can do and how they can, earn the money that they're getting. But besides that, that was really the only thing at Wyoming. It was just there were specific events or things that they had to do it within a certain time frame that was, it handcuffed, that process a little bit.
I will say one of the things we're going to talk about on the panel is that there are some immigration attorneys giving advice to schools that revenue sharing doesn't change anything, that the international athlete can't receive the revenue sharing, but that, otherwise there's no issue. There are also immigration attorneys who strongly believe that if any revenue sharing is happening on a team, international student athletes cannot be on the roster. And I don't know how many people listening into this have run into that, but that's one of the things we're going to talk about in Orlando on this panel is under the definition of work, if other people on the team are getting paid to essentially play the sport, then under federal immigration law, it might view that as work, even if the international athlete isn't receiving compensation. So it gets super complicated, and we'll definitely talk about it more on that panel. And we've talked about doing another NACDA webinar at some point on that as well. So we won't dig into that too deep today, but somebody asked about it, so I wanted to make sure we hit on that quickly. I'm going through we have so many questions coming in that I want to start getting to some of those instead of continuing to go through my questions. And I know Sam has a hard stop at noon. So if anybody has a question specifically for Sam, get that in and I'll make sure I grab it before he goes. But I thought as we were talking about valuation, a good question that came in, and we can sort of go around about this is how much does fundraising factor into your position and your day-to-day? Rachel, I'll start with you on that one.
I always say I have one of the easier jobs in this space with Duke being what it is, but the great thing that they have really, Coach K set up something called the Legacy Fund that we've tapped into for a lot of our fundraising. So it's a lot more education around an engaged audience when it comes to fundraising. So we have a great group both at the athletic department side and on specifically for our basketball program. And I'd say my role in that, Patrick will appreciate this, but is more in like investor relations than it is like going out and fundraising, and also the support from in what our coaches are doing and making sure that we're providing benefits to that group that allows them to understand, appreciate, and get buy-in to NIL as another fundraising component.
Patrick, I'll go to you next.
Investor relations, that was a good one. I never thought of it that way, but that's kind of the same thing here. And both coaches that I've worked with, Coach Wicks and Coach Wade, are very proactive about kind of their efforts, and they operate, I'll say, as our CFOs. And my job is kind of an investor relations role, provide them with what they need to get the message to the shareholders, investors, and let them kind of deliver that. But I've never thought of that before, Rachel. That was very, very good. Definitely more of an investor relations type role, just kind of supporting both coaches that I've worked with in terms of, they're the ones that are, pulling the bulk of the weight, and obviously with our administration being very supportive as well. But just giving him the data, and, a lot of people that we're meeting with, frankly, are people that are highly intelligent people that, they respect, having data backed plans and seeing it and kind of how you envision the process working, and giving them a plan and the steps that you're going to take to get to, where you're trying to go. So investor relations is, I'm going to use that one. That was very good.
Did it look any different at Wyoming than it does at NC State in terms of your role with fundraising?
No, it's been both places. Obviously the coach has been the most forward-facing CFO type position, CEO, where he's getting the message out, and he's carrying the bulk of the work in unison with the administration and stuff. So no, it's been pretty similar at both spots.
Sam, what about at Stanford, or anything different about football?
Yeah, so well, I guess the similar thing I think between Rachel, Patrick, and myself is that for me, it's Andrew is the one responsible for fundraising. So I am kind of the person I work most closely with is the person who's doing it. I think to protect myself, I try to if there is a spot where someone else can staff Andrew in an effective way, I try to let them do it. And I think fundraising is an area where I don't have to be that person, but my background is in storytelling in a lot of ways, and I think that where I have added value in that space is helping craft the story. So I spent a lot of time helping Andrew with like the deck, the pitch, the story. And then what I don't do is kind of like the day-to-day operations of the fundraising and how to turn that into, how many millions for this. That's one that I think kind of let the development team handle. But I do think the story of like where we're going, what we're doing to support, kind of all of that. Like, I think that's very real. And then I think, as Patrick alluded to, some of our donors are like very businessy people, and so I think the more you can help assure them that we are being thoughtful and we have and process oriented, even more than data oriented, it's process oriented, and that it's not just like a throw money at the wall type of thing, and that also gives them some security. But the story is really important, I think, especially where we are in kind of our kind of rebuild. So I do spend a lot of time on the story.
That actually kind of plays into a question somebody else asked. They said you all represent high academic schools. Does the value of the degree from your school have any role any longer in the recruiting process, or is it just subordinate to pay and development to be a pro?
You have to, in this era, whether or not there's a salary cap, we all have limited salary resources. You need to get as much out of every other resource you have as possible. So yes, for us, it's massively important. One, like, even at a place, Power Four school like ours, which has done amazingly in the NFL, like, most people don't go to the NFL, right? So it's like that degree is worth a lot. We also don't have like the leave school early after 1 year thing. Like, the very least, you got to play 3 years in college football. So even NFL guys, I think the degree is attainable. Massively important, I think, in the grad transfer world. We're trying to think through, how do we add value to grad transfers? What does a post back look like? So, I mean, all of that, I think, then some schools do a really good job, not just the academic side, of just having a great student athlete experience. Are you being coached well? Are you being loved? Like, I think, Dabo at Clemson, like, people love to hate on him, but like, it seems like the student athletes feel loved by him. And I think that they feel like they're a part of something. And so I look at that as like an inspiration. So, yes, you just have to, like, you have to get as much value out of everything. You got to get, like, the more people are feeling value from their degree, from their roommate experience, from their coaching, from their nutrition, from their strength, like, that's that's value to them that maybe doesn't have to come in the form of cash. So, like, if you're not leaning into that, you're crazy.
We've got another question that kind of piggybacks off of that. And I'll throw this up for any of you. Thomas asked, how does this role handle academics and the player development, student athlete development aspect for their respective teams? Or is your role just strictly NIL based? Anybody?
I focus on that a lot, actually. So I view my work as everything off the court. So working super closely with our academic advisor. When you look at the player experience, to Sam's point, and everything that goes into that, academics is a huge piece. NIL is just another piece of what we've always used, or Duke has always used to recruit. So working really closely with all of the different people that touch our athletes off the court, knowing that a lot of the times they spend more time with them than even our coaches, and just trying to elevate that as much as we can. And while they're here, a lot of the promises we make to these parents and families is that we're going to help create better young men. And so I think that the academic piece of that, what really it has turned into more for that, especially with transfers and also the one and dones that you mentioned, Sam, it's about the network that you're unlocking and really giving them the tools, opportunities, and the resources to be able to unlock that network. And it's both from the brotherhood, you look at the NBA, some of our donors and investors, but then also your classmates. So a bunch of former players, some of the businesses they've entered with people that they've met in class or in their dorm, or things like, we just try and emphasize the importance of that, and then also encourage them to do so by choreographing some opportunities where they can.
Yeah, I'd say I get a little bit more involved. One, because I'm a two-time alum of Stanford, and so I think I've been in their shoes academically, and I think we have some shared interest and shared experience there. The other thing is, academics ends up being a huge part of roster management. People have figured out, especially, like, people don't leave that often without getting their degree from Stanford. Like, people have figured out that they have more leverage over us and they've got better optionality when they're done with their degree. So there's, like, a lot of things that, like, we used to have red flags set up if people were falling behind in their degree. Now there are red flags set up when people are getting ahead on their degree. I mean, we just had someone grad transfer who graduated in 2.5 years. Like that, these were not problems and they weren't early enrollees. So it was 2.5 years, but only 2 football seasons. So now it's really, it's like setting up a wide spectrum, and so very involved. And then I think you have to not be afraid to ask the questions where you're afraid of the answer. You know what I mean? Like, you have to not be afraid to talk to someone who's a sophomore who's racing through classes and, you know, maybe not even doing that great, but racing through them and say like, hey, I'm noticing this. What's your plan? What are you doing here? You know, does this make sense for you? Why are you doing this? Um, and start a dialogue earlier. Like, you don't want to. I think the temptation is to ignore it until they come into your office and say they're thinking about transferring, and then you're trying to stop them from transferring, and that appears to not be the way to do it. So this off season, for example, one thing I've done, one of my projects is I've talked to every single person on our team who is projected to be able to graduate before finishing all their eligibility. And I've talked to them about it. What's your plan? Are you a grad school guy? Are you not a grad school guy? Right? Like, what might it look like if you want, if you're not a grad school person, but you want to get there, what do you need to do? If that's not important to you, are you going to leave? Are you looking at NFL? What might a backup plan be if you do end up staying? So I think just trying to be really thoughtful and proactive about it, because you don't want to be surprised at the end.
A really interesting shift. I'm glad you brought that up. There's another question that came in that I think piggybacks off of this one a little bit, from Brian, and he asked, "How are you supporting your athletes when it comes to mental health and preventing substance abuse?" I have to tell everybody. So I've been teaching these NIL classes at UF since 2022, every single semester, including summer semester. And I have this project I have them all do where they develop a business in the NIL space, and I tell them it can be any kind of business as long as it's related to NIL. And the number one business that gets created is around mental health for student athletes, because both the athletes and the non-athletes have either picked up on this fear or know someone who's struggling, that NIL has been negative for their mental health, whether that's trying to make time for deals, feeling like they should be doing more with their NIL, like that because they have the ability to monetize it, they should be, and like stressing over like how to do that, or the comparisonitis with their teammates, or the hatred on social media from fans who feel like they're not performing at the level they should be for the money the fan knows or thinks that they're getting. How are you guys handling the mental health aspect? Maybe I'll have Sam go quick first and then we'll let you go because I know you've got a hard stop.
Thank you. Yeah, super important. I think the best way to do that is to train and empower your coaches to be good at it. At least for us, football has 100+ players, so I can't have eyes on all of our players. One, I mean, we've got like amazing kind of like mental health staff, but even they're really like, someone has to refer player or the players to seek that out on their own. So we have an alum of ours, Solomon Thomas, whose family has created some, like, just as an example, has created this awesome program called the Defensive Line. Solomon unfortunately lost his sister to suicide, and he played for us, played in the NFL, and he struggled with mental. And so there was this awesome program a couple weeks ago where his parents came in and they train coaches to look for things, have hard conversations, understand your resources. So I think the best thing you could do is just make sure everybody on your staff is prepared to see things, have conversations about it, not be afraid to kind of check in with each other on some of the things you see. So I think, yeah, just if the more people on staff who are prepared to have these conversations, the better it'll be. But thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry I can't stay for the rest of the Q&A, but
Thanks, Sam.
you find me on LinkedIn or whatever. So talk to you soon.
Thank you, Sam. The rest of us are going to stay on a little bit longer. We have this is the most questions I've ever gotten in a webinar. You guys are very popular, and I'm trying to group some of them together that are related here. There's a lot of there were quite a few that came in related directly to compliance. So I'm going to try to find two that I remember seeing and read them out to you guys. Says, how closely do you work with your compliance staff during the recruitment process as it relates to admissions and transfer eligibility, and what does the timing look like in your process?
Kristi, I'll take this one. And then unfortunately I have to hop at noon as well. I'm sorry about that, but I don't mind taking this one because compliance is the first person I met on my visit here at Duke. And I talk to them several times a day. I think the biggest thing, we've seen it the other way, and you never want to get too far down the road with someone and then realize that it's not going to work. So just double and triple checking. And for Coach Shire, it was big for him, like understanding that our program's pretty high profile. So things that may be gray elsewhere are pretty black and white here at Duke. And so just making sure we're running everything by them. And then also where I empathize with the role. It seems like there's a lot of compliance staff on here, and where I emphasize in the role that you're in is so much up for interpretation. So just working with them to understand how they're interpreting certain rules, and then how even in the contract phase, that's made things a little bit challenging because of how different a different school's interpretation has been. So I think just coming from a level of understanding that we're all trying to protect the program and the athletes, and staying in very regular and close communication with that group.
Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate it. Yeah, if you need to jump, we can let go. And Patrick and I can see how many of the rest of these we can tackle. Can you stay on a little bit longer, Patrick?
Yeah, all
Okay.
good.
We've
Thank
got
you all. I
like
really
15
appreciate it.
Thanks, Rachel. Okay, we've got like 15 questions we haven't hit. A couple of them I'm going to kind of dispense with quickly because I don't think we can go into them too much here. Somebody asked to talk more about the international athletes and what you can and can't do. We've done a webinar on this previously, me with NACDA, and I know you can find it on their YouTube channel, but I also have kind of a microsite for international athletes, and it's just nilforinternationalathletes.com, and it breaks down, you know, what they can and can't do with advice from immigration attorneys. I am an attorney, but not an immigration attorney. And then also it's got the replay of that webinar. Nothing has really changed since we did that webinar, except that there are some new things to talk about around revenue sharing. And that's what we're going to talk about in Orlando. Somebody asked if that's going to be recorded in Orlando. I don't think so, but I'll get with NACDA staff after this. It's something we've talked about doing a separate webinar on. So given the interest I've seen here, we'll see if we can pull something together specifically on that, because that's a whole hour all on its own, and we still wouldn't get to everything we should. So I'm going to skip over that one for right now. Here's a good one I saw come in. Maybe you can weigh in on, Patrick. Somebody asked, and I'm assuming this is for revenue sharing contracts. What is your position on offering a 6-month contract versus a multi-year contract?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it depends on the player and kind of the needs of your team, and you need to be able to forecast a little bit what you're looking for. But obviously, if you can have the ability to lock a player in for a certain price or value, especially if you think they have some metrics that indicate that they're going to break out the next season or perform above kind of what their market is this year, a multi-year, deal that you could do with a player could not only be beneficial for you as a team and staff, but also, it gives the player and the agent that security too. And, there's still a lot to be said about staying at a place for multiple years and kind of, establishing your legacy and identity within that team. So they could be good both ways. And there could be options in them, for the player, team, or both that kind of make it fit within what everyone's trying to do. But from our standpoint, when you can lock a player up for multiple years, and you think you're getting them at a price that's good and going to give you guys an edge in terms of expected value, you for sure would want to do that.
Another interesting one maybe you've run across here. I'm just trying, and these aren't all related. I tried to group together the ones that are related, but now we're in kind of these will be like rapid fire questions. Somebody asked, how do you handle potential tampering during the men's basketball tournament? Have you dealt with that at all?
I haven't dealt with it specifically. I'm sure, moving forward we will, but it's something that goes on across the country. I think that in terms of, unless things get regulated or kind of drawn back a little bit, it probably will still happen after the fact. But you can't really handle it. I mean, you just need to focus, in my opinion, on your team. And if you're in the NCAA tournament, like Rachel said, they were at Duke, focusing on just winning a championship and being in it for that season. There's, everybody's going to be, trying to get a leg up and either contacting the players or agents or people they know and trying to see, if they'd be willing to leave and trying to pry them away. So as long as you're just focused on the mission at hand and trying to win the games in the season that you're in, I think that's the best that you could do, because it's always going to be there behind the scenes. And you can, just control what you can control, and you can't really control that. So just kind of focusing on winning games in the season you're in.
I saw a couple that just came in that I don't mind grabbing. Somebody asked on the multi-year, are there any teeth in the contract? Can you hold the player accountable? And somebody else asked, is anybody considering buyouts in the contract? So I've looked at a couple of dozen, and I talked to 5 different attorneys, I think. I have an NIL book coming out this summer, and I did a chapter on revenue sharing contracts, and it was advice for athletes and parents on what to look out for. And so I reviewed quite a few. There are buyouts in, especially some of the Power 4 contracts. There are clawbacks, meaning they actually want to get back money they already paid. So when you do have those multi-year contracts, that's when you see the buyouts and the clawbacks and some of those sorts of things. I have not seen it in the season-long or year-long year-long contracts off the top of my head that I have reviewed, but it's definitely been the multi-year. But the question is whether you can enforce it or not. There's an issue happening, some of you may have seen at Arkansas with, and I'm not going to remember Nico Iamaleva's brother's name, but his brother who was at Arkansas, who's decided to go to UCLA with him, they are wanting to enforce a liquidated damages clause in the contract, which would require him to pay money to Arkansas's collective. And he was never even there and didn't play. And so I was on a panel with Darren Heitner, who's representing him last week. And Darren was talking about, they would have to prove that they suffered damages in that amount, that they somehow were harmed to that amount of money in order to get it. So Darren doesn't really think that, that will be a successful claim. I don't think so either, in my legal opinion. So those things are in contracts, but whether or not they will be enforceable is a completely different story. So that's another one we could do an entire hour, probably just on revenue sharing contracts. Another one that came up quite a few times, and I'm going to kind of group them all together, was a lot of people wanting to know, Patrick, more about getting hired as a GM, the skills you have to have. Somebody asked, like, would it make sense for them to go get their MBA? Is that something that they need? What would your advice be to people who want this role in the future in terms of experience or skills they should be trying to gain now?
I think everyone's path is different. And as we touched on here, the GM role is different in a lot of places. And it's about, whatever you're good at and adding value to the best of your ability in that role. So for me, it was analytics. Rachel, obviously, it seemed like relationships, and she had the business background. Like there's ways to add value to these programs, because even though, it's becoming more and more like pro sports, like for my example, NBA teams have full analytics staff. So if I can, bring that value, and my specialty is analytics, if we can have our own analytics staff within house, and it's just me, just bringing value in a skill set that's kind of an X factor. You think about it like sports. What can you bring to the team that helps? But in terms of MBA, I don't have my MBA. I probably would have gone back and got one had I, joined a basketball staff right out of school and been a GA or something like that. But I don't have one. I'm sure it would be advantageous to get and look nice. But I don't specifically have one. It's really just about your connections. The way I got on with Coach Wicks at Wyoming was he was a client of mine with my basketball analytics company. And it's really just about, adding value. He was always leaning on me for lineup information or ways to tinker with the team when he was at Green Bay. And, we just kind of formed a relationship and built trust there. And, he thought enough of me to bring me on as the GM. And obviously Coach Wade, they were a client as well at McNeese. And I got connected to Coach Wade through one of my clients at Nebraska. So it's really about relationships and just adding value where you can, finding out what your skill set is, what you like to do, and how you can help make a team better within that skill set.
I've got two more left up here that I'm going to try to hit. One, we didn't talk about this at all, and I sort of meant to, but there were so many things to talk about. As you guys can see, we couldn't fit everything in. I wanted to talk about what the relationship or the conversations look like with players who have agents. And this person specifically asked, how would a standard certification process for agents simplify your job, and what would that process look like? I will just say, I have been like queen of the soapbox for certifying agents. I've had 3 phone calls with the NCAA where they asked my thoughts on it. I would love to see it, because I get the stories from athletes about things that have gone wrong with agents and ways they've been taken advantage of or not served well. It's in my book. I did a whole chapter on how to hire an agent and questions that athletes should ask an agent before they hire. That's available free online too. You don't have to buy my book to get that. I put that up, I think, in a blog post and in a couple of other places. But on your side of it, what have you seen, and what is your relationship or those conversations like with agents? And is there any way you wish it was different?
I think it differs with different agents, and I'm sure you, as you touch on, and maybe in your book, there's a lot of people, I think, in the space right now, and maybe the fat's getting trimmed a little bit, but there's a lot of goofy people, I'd say, that are, taking advantage of not only the players, but they try to take advantage of the schools as well. And as far as the legal side of it, I'm not as familiar as to what, kind of checklists and things would be beneficial for those people to get. But I think it differs, and it's about relationships again. It's just understanding, first off, if they're throwing out a number that's just completely crazy, which is why the data helps to understand what players are worth, kind of, you can get a feel of, if they're they're bluffing or if they're taking advantage of the player. I've seen certain agents taking a really substantial percentage of players, and it's just about, from a player standpoint, having a support team or family or just being educated on, what to look for in an agent is really beneficial, I think. And you don't want someone that's going to take advantage of you, and it's going to add value to you. And it's, from our side, it's about understanding, who has substance to them and dealing with them, in a professional manner. And a lot of them will kind of show their card based on how professionally they operate within the space and in the conversations. But it's really about just, always having your little sensors up and understanding who's legitimate and who's not. And just a thorough vetting process through the whole recruiting period. You're talking with the players. In some cases they direct you directly to the agent. So it just varies from case to case, but you need to definitely have your antennas up, especially right now when dealing with some of that stuff.
I thought we'd end on one that I think can be kind of a positive note. Not that this has all been negative, but I wanted to end with something kind of strong here. Somebody was following up on the conversation that happened earlier about player experience, and they asked, what do you track specifically when discussing how to create a culture of success to help attract and retain student athletes?
That's a good question. I mean, that goes a lot into the recruiting process, and the coaches that are very good at kind of identifying that. They've been doing it their whole careers. But, when you're watching a player play on one of the shoe circuits or scouting their high school game, what kind of teammate are they? When they're not in the game, how do they get subbed out? Everybody knows what good culture looks like. And, it's about being a supportive teammate, good body language, and, whether you're winning or losing, having no quit in you, and just things that, generally are just, if you're a good person, genuinely, culturally, you'll be a good fit. And obviously you have to do some digging in the recruiting process about what kind of person they are. And that's another, job of the staff and myself to kind of have those conversations and look for things. But I think really it's just about their body language when you're during the recruiting process, in the game, getting to know the person, not just making it transactional. And culture starts from the top. So the culture you have within your staff and everybody, and how you operate. Do you operate professionally? Does everyone's opinion get respected? Do they add value? Everything that, translates to business in the real world about being a good person and being good culturally translates to sports just the same way.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us, Patrick. I know we had people sort of drop off as we went here, but such a good conversation. I think we covered a lot of great topics. There were still so many. For those of you that we didn't get to your questions, I know we need to have a part 2 of this, so maybe we can work that out. But Patrick, thank you for being here and sharing so much of your experience with us.
Thank you guys for your time. Had a blast.
And to everyone else, I hope to see you in Orlando at convention. And there will be all sorts of NIL and revenue sharing topics, including the panel I have, which will have a Title IX attorney, an immigration attorney, a finance person, and an athletic director. So we're going to talk about all the sort of future issues we see as we move into the revenue sharing era. So I hope to see you there. Thank you, everyone.